Hey guys, it's Gavin T360 and welcome to what I like to call Ultimate TV Showdown. This is the culmination of a year full of watching nothing but new TV shows. The project has always been the same, to watch as many new shows that I possibly can within the span of a year, rank the shows from worst to best, and to summarize my experience and takeaways from them. I had no idea that I'd be watching more than 30 completely shows though, so making this video turned out to be a lot harder than I thought it would be. So, in the interest of keeping my sanity, this will be split into two videos that will probably take a very long time for me to release, but it is what it is. Anyways, let's focus more on the details. The longer shows took me months to watch, while some of the shorter ones only took me about a day. What I'm saying is, not all of these shows are created equally, especially when you consider that I'm comparing shows of very different genres and styles, like comparing apples and oranges. But aside from the unfair nature of this list, I still thought that it would be a fun challenge for myself to rank these very different shows. This ranking will also include miniseries, because I really wanted to talk about the Marvel shows too, and I don't really discriminate in the size of the show as long as it is one. I'm also including seasons of shows that came out in 2021, even if I've seen seasons prior, namely Rick and Morty, Big Mouth, and Big Brother. Everything else is something that I have never seen before, hence why it's such a random selection. I wanted a completely unbiased opinion, so watching shows I love to rewatch would do nothing but interfere with my studies. With that being said, here is the full list of shows I've watched this year: Game of Thrones, The Stand, WandaVision, Arrested Development, BoJack Horseman, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Living with Yourself, Invincible, The End of the Effing World, Infinity Train, MODOK, Love, Death and Robots, Better Call Saul, Twin Peaks, Loki, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, American Horror Story, Attack on Titan, Rick and Morty, The Owl House, Monsters at Work, American Horror Stories, Big Brother, Marvel's What If, The Boys, Only Murders in the Building, Squid Game, Big Mouth, Inside Job, The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, Hawkeye, and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Whew! Now that everyone's introduced, let's get started. Wow, this spin-off of the much better American Horror Story really sucks. It's like if Black Mirror was written by kindergartners, but like really horny kindergartners. Wait, that sounds wrong. Every single episode was so dull and uninteresting and just lacking to the point that it was a chore to finish the series, despite the fact that it was only 7 episodes. And the worst thing about this show is that three of those 7 episodes are about Murder House. Every time American Horror Story touches Murder House, it retroactively makes the original season worse and worse. Apocalypse was one thing, but this series stapling more and more stories to this jumbled mess of a story is the straw that broke the camel's back. I hope if they continue this series that they actually put creativity and especially originality into them next time, because the only entertainment I got out of these episodes was watching the opening credits. That's it. That was the only good thing about these episodes. So it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyways, that this is the worst show that I watched in 2021. Congratulations, American Horror Stories. You win. You suck.
Uh, Meow?
The Stand, 2020. The acting is garbage, the effects are garbage, and it's just terribly, horribly not entertaining at all. Somehow, this miniseries is nearly twice as long as the original, and yet it feels completely hollow. The characters are barely developed whatsoever. The characters that they do focus on and develop are completely pointless and end up dying in the least interesting way possible. You could argue that it's only bad because the book is bad, but oh wait, there is already a much better adaptation with a much smaller budget made back in 1994. Why are they trying again? Because the film industry is out of ideas. Um, yeah, that's about it. I love James Marsden,
Uh, meow?
but this was really bad, and I don't even have anything else to say about it.
Attention everyone! Run for your lives! Robots have taken over the world!
The long awaited Love, Death, and Robots Season 2 was very hit or miss to me, just like the first season, although I'd argue that this time around it was a considerably weaker package. To start, this season is significantly shorter than the first, so it was never even really given a chance to succeed. But even the best episodes of this season are no match to the first season's best episodes. There were only two episodes this time around that I actually ended up enjoying, and those were episode 5, The Tall Grass, and episode 8, The Drowned Giant. Neither of these are incredible or anything, but I at least vibe well with the atmosphere and art design enough to enjoy them. I liked episode 1, Automated Customer Service, but the animation is just fucking horrible. It hurts to look at, and it just soiled the experience. Also, I'm getting a little bit tired of the same old quote unquote technology bad stories. The rest of the episodes were not bad or anything, but they were just really uninteresting and not worth watching, in my opinion, which is kind of sad because, especially after saying all of that, I feel pretty bad for this show. Season 1 had so many great shorts that I still remember vividly, but Season 2 really just dropped the ball completely. I really hope they're able to salvage this series because it has incredible potential, and I don't want to see any of that potential go to waste. But as it is, it's not doing great.
Welcome to the Himalayas!
I don't know what exactly I was expecting from a sequel to Monsters Inc., but I guess I was just hoping it would at least have Mike and Sully as the main characters. Monsters Inc. is my favorite Pixar movie and also just my favorite Disney movie, so to watch it get swept into Disney's desire to capitalize on our childhood nostalgia makes me pretty upset. But let's get the good things out of the way first. Mike and Sully are in nearly every episode of the show and usually have their own B plot going on, so in terms of giving us new content with those beloved characters, it fills that void, if only just a little bit. It's also great to see the incredible side characters like Celia, Roz, Needleman and Smitty, and that one guy who slipped on a soccer ball. And it's interesting to see how they're all adapting to their new environment. The Abominable Snowman episode was a really great way to retroactively help the poor guy out, and that was definitely my favorite episode. The Big Wazowski episode was a genius concept, and I think they missed the opportunity to make John Goodman act like a crazy bowler again. That's about all the positives I could say for the show, however. The new central protagonists are so dull and uninteresting that I was kind of surprised. They have such bland and contrived conflicts that I basically don't remember any of the episodes other than the Mike and Sully parts. They have character arcs and life lessons that feel so lifeless and elementary that I can't possibly understand what was going through Disney's mind when making this show. Yes, it's a kids show, but it's designed to draw in fans of Monsters Inc. to watch it. And Monsters Inc. is now 20 years old, which means the audience attracted to the series does not need to be taught Sesame Street lessons. And we're really just here to watch Billy Crystal and John Goodman bring back two of the most likable characters of all time. Why do we have to sit through 20 minutes of bland and unfunny garbage just to see Mike give a lecture on the purpose of a knock knock joke for 2 minutes? I don't want to dislike this show, but just saying all of this out loud really makes me realize how much I didn't enjoy this.
Finally, a good reason to punch a teenager in the face!
The End of the Effing World is a show that I watched this year and completely forgot about the moment I finished it. I have no negative feelings about the show. I remember somewhat liking it, but even when I recollect through the full story, I definitely think it was not a show that I would ever revisit again. The characters and their journeys were entertaining, but they really left no impact whatsoever. I'd recommend the show to the small amount of people who like bizarre, edgy coming of age stories, but if you're anything like me, then I wouldn't spend much of your time on it. The show will forever be filed in the boring manila folder in the back of my mind. Even if they made a season 3, which I really don't think they will, I don't think I'll be tuning into it.
The gloved Mandalorian armor gauntlet of Boba Fett.
MODOK. MODOK was good. Was it amazing? Definitely not, but it was serviceable television. It was decently funny, well casted, and a fun little show to watch. The animation style was very enjoyable, and I liked that it didn't take itself very seriously. It's definitely not a very memorable show, as I'm really struggling to find something more to talk about. To be fair, it's a very short watch that doesn't stand out in any strong way, but if you're into a satirical superhero show, then this may be the one for you. I have nothing else to say. I don't know why I come back to this show every season. I just do. Maybe I think the show is genuinely funny or entertaining, or maybe I just like torturing myself. But that's just the thing. I don't know. I can't seem to figure out whether I love the show or despise it. The twisted comedy, the god awful animation, and the crude nature of the show all combine to make what I believe is an addictively terrible show. I think I feel the same way about this as I did with 13 Reasons Why. I was able to watch that whole series, but I hated the whole thing throughout. The only difference is Rotten Tomatoes seems to disagree strongly. Either way, comparing it to the vast majority of the other shows I watched this year, this one does do so good. So I'll see you next season, Big Mouth. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier was definitely an alright show, but I wouldn't say it went above and beyond in any particular way. The fight scenes were always pretty good, Zemo was pretty entertaining, and I'm very happy to get genuine character development for Sam and Bucky, and their relationship was the exact kind of buddy cop dynamic I was looking for. John Walker was a very engaging villain for most of the show, until the ending where he really didn't matter all that much. Sharon was a very confusing character to me, so I think I might have to rewatch the show 6 or 7 times to actually get a grip on her. Carly was an acceptable character, but didn't compel me one way or the other to care about her antics. Her death, and therefore the end of the main conflict, was pretty abrupt and didn't leave much of an impact. I like to look at the show mostly as character development for the title characters, so the villains being secondary to that is acceptable. I got enough action, comedy, and good character development to feel satisfied from this show, and I am excited to see where the MCU can go from there. But as a whole, this was definitely the weakest Marvel show to come out this year. Inside Job was a pretty good show, but really didn't leave much of an impact on me. It had entertaining protagonists with Reagan, the socially inept leader, Brett, the socially gifted co leader, and a wide group of slightly underdeveloped weirdos. The show's concept that every conspiracy theory ever made is true and is hidden by the government is a really strong premise and has a lot of potential for creative and fun episodes. But where I think the show falls flat a bit is the execution of some of those episodes. Most of the time, the episode is centered around one conspiracy and how the characters have to interact with it. Hilarity ensues, and the characters learn a lesson on how to be a better person. This episode structure is fine on paper, but for an adult animated show, it feels a bit bland to me. I do like when characters learn lessons on bettering themselves, but the cause for this show seems to be the creativity and fun. When the characters' personal struggles take up 95% of the episode, I sometimes completely forget the premise of the show. What I'm saying is, I think they need to do a better job of incorporating the supernatural elements of the show with the character struggles. Otherwise, the premise of the show will be essentially wasted on another trope filled drama. There are a few episodes that work well, but as a whole, I think the series so far is a mixed bag.
Oh no! Oh no!
Oh no!
Oh yeah!
I have some serious mixed feelings about this show. Sometimes I think it's one of the best Marvel shows of the year, and on other days I think it's one of the weakest. In this one's defense, I liked almost every episode and how they explored characters we've come to know over the years in new and creative ways. Captain Carter was a good starting point for the series, essentially remodeling the events of Captain America the First Avenger around a different character entirely. T'Challa Star-Lord was probably my favorite episode of the whole series because it gives us a taste of a massively different universe that's very entertaining. Not to mention the pretty awesome Collector boss fight at the end. Episode 3 had a good ending, Episode 4 was pretty fantastic overall, Episode 5 had the zombie apocalypse, which is something that I've always secretly wanted. That episode was pretty amazing. Paul Rudd was a floating head in it. What more could I ask for? Episode 6 and 7 were definitely the weakest of the batch. Killmonger was cool, but he was just being himself, so they weren't really breaking any new ground. And the Party Thor episode was really underwhelming and boring. The final two episodes were alright by bringing together most of the previous multiverses into a cool battle with an omnipotent god, although it does feel like half of the characters that they brought to bring down Ultron didn't end up doing anything at all. Regardless, I think this show is pretty good. It has a lot of potential for creative stories with the large amount of MCU characters it has, and I'm very excited to see where it can go from here. But I do think as a whole I enjoyed most of the other Marvel shows of the year instead.
Look at us. Look at us. Huh? Who would have thought?
Not me.
Living with Yourself was a show that was probably made just for me. For those of you that don't know, I'm a huge fan of Paul Rudd and everything that he's in. It all started around the time when I was rewatching Friends for the 30th time, and I realized that Paul Rudd's character, Mike Hannigan, was by far my most favorite character in the whole show. When I took a step back, I realized that he was my favorite character in just about everything he was in. So, when I heard that a show came out in 2019 where there was not one, but two Paul Rudds, I knew I had to check it out. Now, I'll be completely honest on the quality of the show and try to keep my biases in check, but I gotta say, I really enjoyed this show. Paul Rudd was charming as always and spread that charisma into the roots of the show, causing me to always smile when thinking about it. The premise of this show is that Paul Rudd's character, Miles, finds himself at a cloning facility disguised as a spa. Miles unknowingly clones a new version of himself that's supposed to be a more uplifting and optimistic version of himself. The cloning facility is supposed to make sure that the original Miles is killed and buried, but fails to do so, and both versions of Miles come on the loose. They meet each other and try to figure out a life where they could both be happy, but keeping a clone a secret is a very difficult task. Hilarity and drama ensues. The show itself comes off like an early 2000s comedy due to the fact that most people involved have previously worked on similar feeling projects. I do feel like this show would have been a bit better if it were actually a movie, because in total, this show is about 3.5 hours long, and admittedly, some episodes drag out a little longer than necessary. If it were a clean 2.5 hours, I think this would have made a really solid movie, but I can't complain too much in having plenty of time to enjoy double Paul Rudd action.
That's what she said.
In total, I really like this show. It's nothing incredible, but it's a very enjoyable experience that I'd happily recommend to anyone. And like I said, it's only about 3.5 hours, making this one of the shortest shows I watched last year. If I could binge watch it in one afternoon, so could you.
I have been falling for 30 minutes.
I really can't decide whether or not I like Loki more or less than the previous two MCU shows. On one hand, I fell in love with WandaVision in its early episodes, and I still think that the show had the strongest start. On the other hand, both WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier had endings that did not have nearly as much of an impact as I wish they'd had. Loki fits right into the middle of that. The start wasn't amazing, but it was entertaining and got my attention. The show stayed fairly consistent in that quality all the way to the end, where the finale was not that bad, but about on course with the other two shows. But in this one's case, the ending will directly lead into another season, so the flaws aren't nearly as detrimental as they could have been. Overall, I really enjoyed the show the most when it was just two characters having intelligent conversations, and I'd argue that this show has significantly stronger writing than the previous two shows. My favorite episode of the show is probably the second episode, where the majority of the time spent was Loki and Mobius having conversations about the TVA. The problem with the rest of the show is that it's lacking in energy. The action scenes aren't anything fun to watch, the antagonists are pretty lame, and a lot of the twists and reveals were just okay. Don't get me wrong, I liked pretty much every episode, but my reasons for liking them were essentially because I could watch Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson talk for hours. There were other aspects of the show that I liked too, like the different variations of Loki in episode 5. They were the type of chaos I was hoping for in the show, so all of the Loki shenanigans were quite a joy to watch. I think that the romance between Loki and Sylvie is comically amazing because that's the most narcissistic romance of all time and it fits the character flawlessly. And don't get me started about the soundtrack. It's just incredible, and it gives off such a unique vibe that befits the show perfectly. So, in conclusion, I really like the show, but it does have a few aspects holding it back for me. I wouldn't rank it as high as other MCU projects or other shows in this list.
Every single person sitting here was a part of history, and I wouldn't want any of that to be fractured because of a misunderstanding.
I admit it, I watch reality television. Well, it's actually just this one. I've been watching Big Brother since season 14, and I've come to really enjoy it over the years. I've always found the challenges to be really fun, the household drama to be super entertaining, and the eviction night to be intense and exciting. There have been seasons that, for lack of a better term, suck. Maybe there's a lack of likable house guests, maybe the twist of the season is terrible, or maybe the season is just way too boring. In BB21's case, all of the above. But this time around, however, I think the season avoids most of those pitfalls. The majority of the house is filled with kind and likable players, all with entertaining plans and strategies, and the twist of the season, while not being anything grand, doesn't completely ruin the game. But in all fairness, this season is a little bit boring. Don't get me wrong, there was never a point where I was too bored, but there was definitely a point where the season stopped being unpredictable. Tiffany's plan was just too good. Every single week was another nail in the coffin for those outside of the Cookout Alliance, and 7 or 8 weeks straight of watching the plan work perfectly got just a little bit old. The final six rejuvenated the spirit of Big Brother, given that the plan was officially over and now the players can finally get competitive, but that only gave us around 3 or so weeks of entertaining gameplay. Kylan's confrontation with Xavier after being evicted was probably the only compelling drama of the whole season, and in that scenario, it didn't feel good to watch because Kylan took it way too far and still won't own up to it. What a guy. Asshole aside, I think Xavier was more than deserving of the victory, definitely more than the two competition flops, Ozza and Big D. And overall, I think this will go down as one of the better seasons of Big Brother. I can only hope that Celebrity Big Brother holds its ground this winter. Twin Peaks is a show that I was never planning on watching, but I'm very glad I did. The reason I watched it was because Netflix was just about to banish it from their site, and I figured that I should probably knock it out when I had the chance. I didn't know much about the show except that it was some kind of cult classic 90s mystery drama. The story takes place after a local teen girl is found murdered in horrific fashion. We follow Special Agent Dale Cooper as he investigates the murder and comes to know the residents and history of the small town. There are many side characters with interconnecting plot lines that form around the main plot to give context to even the smallest of details. Some of these stories are fun and interesting, with likable characters that liven the show, while other side plots are exceptionally annoying and or boring as hell. The series is overall rather slow regardless, and for every solution or advancement to the plot, there's an entire new issue that the character needs to fight through. All the way to the end, there are very few satisfying moments where the current mystery is overcome in any particular way. Even the ending of the show leaves the audience on a very unsatisfying cliffhanger, with most of the plot threads not being completed in the slightest. These cliffhangers may or may not have been resolved in the sequel series, but I myself can't imagine watching this original show and then having to wait 25 whole years to continue the story. Plot aside, the show has its charm. There are many endearing characters that I would love to just hang out with in person, and there are some unintentionally hysterical moments in this show. The feeling of mystery is surprisingly powerful, and I felt myself actively engaged consistently throughout the whole show, despite its snail pace. It's an atmospheric pleasure of a show, and it gives off so many warm and inviting small town vibes that I could easily tell why it became such a cult classic. It's definitely not the best show I've seen this year, but I have no doubts that I will revisit this show in the future.